The title of this could be Don't Listen to Your Parents. All right? Shut them up. Don't listen to them. Basically, it's a new world that we live in, and we need to catch up to it. So, my father, he worked at one job his whole life. Okay, whoever does that anymore?
Well, that's what I think people need to...
So you've got to change your attitude about what work is now and not have your parents' attitude about work. And I think the people who are experiment in their 20s, who learn different skills, who aren't so hung up on money, they're going to be the ones in their 30s and 40s who are going to be running this world, who are going to be making money, who are going to be fun.
And I think that's a great point.
And I've seen it.
Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Media Mayhem. We have a really good show in store today. My guest is Robert Greene, who is a Los Angeles-based author who wrote the international bestseller, The 48 Laws of Power. He also wrote The Art of Seduction, which sold more than 500,000 copies, The 33 Strategies of War, which has sold more than 200,000 copies, and The 50th Law, which he co-wrote with rapper 50 Cent. His new book, Mastery, which we're going to be discussing today, will be released on November 13th, 2012, but you can pre-order it on Amazon right now. And I have read it, and we're going to be chatting about it, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Alice.
I'm really excited to talk to you because I think your books are a wonderful blend of philosophy and some instruction and fabulous historical stories, which show quite, to use your term, a mastery of literature and humanities, and you draw from some of the greats in terms of some of the great stories that you might learn if you were going to take 5,000 different courses, but they're all kind of compiled into one book, and that was certainly true in the 48 Laws of Power, which is, it's a fascinating book, and we were just discussing it before the show started, and my first question to you is did you find it difficult to watch journalists sort of come at you with a perception that you had written something that advised people to act in a cruel way to each other, in a way to succeed in which they sort of were only self-centered and based on themselves? And because a lot of the coverage attacked the book for not being that nice in terms of what you're advising. So how was it when you would sit down for the different interviews, and did a lot of the journalists in the mainstream media get the book really wrong when it first came out? Well,
they weren't necessarily terribly hard on me. I was actually maybe expecting worse, but they totally misunderstood the book. Journalists, the first thing I have to say is the book isn't really about how to be cruel or how to, screw people, etc. Basically, what I wanted to do, based on my experience in Hollywood and working in journalism too, was just to expose what really goes on in offices, in businesses every single day. We've all witnessed it. I've had many, many office jobs, and I said I've worked in Hollywood, etc., where you see the boss, the underlings acting in very political ways, being extremely manipulative. And what was pissing the hell off of me, pissing me off a lot, was that nobody was writing about this. We could write about sex or anything else, but this was like the dirty little secret, as if Bill Gates is only about charity, but he's not practicing these hardball tactics. So I just wanted to say, look, I'm going to reveal the laws of power to the world. This is what people do. You can do with it what you want. Okay, so that was my motivation. Now, basically journalists in mainstream media, they're looking for a story. They're not looking for the truth. And this is sort of the pre-internet era where things have gone a little bit more extreme, where everyone's trying to get the maximum amount of hits. But they were trying to play up the sort of ugly side of it. I remember the New York Magazine, the title was Chicken Soup for the Soulless, was the title of, covering this book. And I was on the O'Reilly Factor, and he was sort of ripping me to pieces, saying, he likes the book, but he hates what I'm talking about. He wishes that there weren't people like that in the world. And he's everybody knows, it's clear as day as if you watch his show, he's the most manipulative interviewer. He deliberately chooses sorry about that.
I know, was you scared? Did it scare you?
A little bit. We've all seen that YouTube video where he yells at his assistant.
Tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
When it comes to O'Reilly, yeah.
But, you know, he hates that people operate this way, but he deliberately chooses, if he wants to cover a particular subject, he'll choose somebody that's a liberal representative who has no television experience, who he can really back into a corner. He's extremely manipulative. So what annoys me, and it still annoys me to this day, and I recently had a newspaper interview like that, they're always looking for the angle that kind of plays up the dark, ugly, Machiavellian side, as opposed to the truth, which is, I'm trying to reveal stuff about human nature, what's really going on in the world. Let's talk about the real issues that I'm bringing up instead of trying to play the holier than thou, I'm journalist Gandhi type crap that I get. You know, that's
so basically, I mean, you're being interviewed by journalists who are practicing these techniques and telling you how evil they are. I mean, certainly O'Reilly uses a lot of what's in this book. For me, when I was reading it, it was very representative of what I encountered when I was in a law firm.
Right.
Exactly. There's the different archetypes that are there, and I think basically what I got from this, and I mean, some of it is you could go the extreme route and follow it by rote, but what I got from it was this is what's going on. So you, person who have no clue, have a better understanding of how your office environment works.
Exactly.
And that's a tough thing, because when I came out of school and I went right into a law firm at 23 with no corporate experience, this world was crazy shocking. I mean, to first get into it. Yeah, who's exceeding, who's coming up the ladder, who somehow makes themselves seem less smart.
Right.
And everybody likes them more, even though they seem to be less competent as well.
Right. Well, I've written this book precisely for that reason. This is a book for the have-nots, not for the Bill Gates of the world, the Bill O'Reillys. They don't need this book. It's in their DNA. They're mean and manipulative and nasty, and they just are that way. This is for the people who really aren't. Like, I'm one of those people like you, who was kind of out of college, naive, full of books and stuff like that. I'm thinking the world's going to be like a Proust novel or something, and it's not. And so this is a book to sort of show you what you're not going to get in university. And like law number 1, never outshine the master, is all about how if you inadvertently try too hard to please your boss and to please the people that you're working with, you're going to inadvertently make the boss insecure, and that kind of ego and feeling insecure will maybe make him or her turn against you. These are things that are things about human nature we don't like to confront, the fact that we're ego-ridden, that we feel envy. And you enter the workplace and you're not expecting that, and lo and behold, you're fired one day and you don't even know what the fuck you did.
Right.
And you violated law number 1. So.
And it's counterintuitive for somebody who first gets into an environment who wants to show off.
Right.
I thought it was such an interesting thing. Do you think that the rule of not outshining the master applies? The law of not outshining. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Of not outshining the master applies more for women than it would for men, because it spoke to me. Because I think that when you're a woman and you appear to be too knowledgeable or too smart in that environment, that you're even more threatening to the person who's in charge.
Well, women have it so much harder than men in the work environment, because they're being judged by 2 or 3 different standards that men usually don't have. And if they seem too pleasing and charming, they seem like they're using their sexual energy. I mean, it's doubly difficult for women. So the book, I think, can be very helpful. I mean, I've outshone the master, law number 1, as a man, and I know plenty of men who violated that law. But yeah, I can see your point. The idea that women are more socialized to try and please people, and so that could be a common dynamic. But really, I wrote the book sort of gender-free and
I see everything through that.
Well,
I have to say,
I think it's great, and people, my books are very popular in the hip hop community, and I have a huge African American readership, and they see it through the lens of what they've been through. That's fine, but I really wanted to say this is about human nature, and every men and women are confronting the same issues. It might be harder for women in some ways, but. This applies to people living in ancient China 2,500 years ago and to anybody in an office nowadays.
I know. I think that's really fascinating. It's like not so much has changed.
No.
Very little has changed.
No.
Let me ask you about you brought up your association with the hip hop community. You wrote the 50th Law. You co-wrote it with rapper 50 Cent.
Right.
And when I was looking at the 48 Laws and reading the 48 Laws of Power and even reading the Mastery, I wonder, what is it do you think about your books that appealed, and I'm sure 50 Cent told you, that appealed to the hip hop community? And I wonder if they don't, you said they look through a lens. My feeling is, do they bring a certain more violence or anger to the laws than, say, those who have had more benefits and more access to better education and different things, or in a different socioeconomic class? I just wonder, why are they so moved by what you're writing?
Well, it has nothing to do with the violence, as far as I can tell. Basically, if we look at, say, 50 in his story, you know, his mother was murdered when he was like 8 years old. He never knew his father, so he's raised by his grandparents, and he's this very ambitious young man. And the only thing that he can see that's an avenue for anything remotely interesting in his life is to deal drugs, is to become a hustler. He's in Southside Queens. There's no other possibility. To go to school is just, those are for losers. You're going to end up working at McDonald's and dead when you're in your 20s. So he becomes a hustler.
I saw the movie.
Okay, you saw the movie.
I saw Terry Winters.
Well, the movie's a little.
He was not so happy with it.
It's a movie. And, you know, he's dealing on the streets. Hustling is very boring. There's nothing romantic about it. And he said, you know, this is the worst job you can have. You're sitting at there 6 in the morning, it's freezing, and it's boring as shit. There's no change. It's always the same thing. And so, and there's a lot of violence. And eventually he finds his way into the music business. And he told me nothing working on the streets prepared him for the music business. The people on the streets, you kind of knew where they were coming from. You knew that they could be violent. You could sort of suss it out pretty quickly who was on your side, who wasn't. But you got in the music business, and the sharks and the manipulation and the games playing and the stakes and the money. He said, I wasn't prepared. It was like something 10 times more difficult, hair-raising, and violent in its own way, but of kind of a veiled violence. And so he, when he started off, found the 48 Laws of Power extremely helpful in dealing with the music industry. And a lot of, you know, black musicians in America have traditionally been insanely exploited.
Right.
They're like the slaves of the music business. You know, make a few $1 million and then you're out, and then forget about you. And this was in a period in the 90s where rappers were trying to become business people and own their own music. And they were dealing with these sharks, and they were out of their element, and they really identified with the book. So it connected with them on the business level, not on the street level so much.
That's interesting.
But one other thing I'd add, people who aren't rappers, I think a lot of black people in America understand they don't have any illusions about people being saints in the workplace. They know that the power game is ugly, it's manipulative, it's difficult. People try and control the game. It's not about fairness. They've lived that for many, many years. So when they see a book that's kind of being honest about it, they go, wow, that's reality, and that's going to help me. But I find the people who get the most upset about it are generally sort of defensive about this subject, generally white people who feel that this shouldn't be what the world is about. So the realism aspect, I think, also appeals to their culture,
Did you think that, I mean, I think what you're also doing that's kind of interesting is in the laws of power is showing societies or different businesses that are supposed to be much nicer than they actually are. And we were talking about this with Hollywood, because Hollywood is probably as much of a ugly battleground as, I don't know, a Machiavelli's, you know, as Florence. I mean, in some of your different stories, or Chinese warfare, and that they play to win, but there's a really shiny, attractive, almost unreal veneer over everything.
Right.
So I guess the same thing is true of the music businesses, is true of Hollywood, and that did you find that Hollywood was kind of angry about?
Oh, not at all.
How did they react, or did they see themselves in the book?
Oh, yes, totally. I mean, when it first came out, there was a Vanity Fair piece. I don't know if you know Richard Rushfield. I think
Yes.
he did it. Okay,
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, yeah.
This was like the most read book among agents in Hollywood, right? And they embraced it, you know, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I think agents are obviously that
Agents,
way,
yeah.
but I think
They're a
that
different breed.
everybody, they're their own like vile section of them. Just my feeling. But I was talking about people that run the studios,
Oh.
and it's something that I've been really interested in because they seem to be incredibly. I actually asked a studio head one time if he spent all his time looking over his shoulder, if that's sort of the way he lived his life, and he answered, no, but he occasionally looks back there. I mean, and he also, and I think this is true, a lot of the really powerful people in Hollywood do your law of power where they act that they're not as smart as they actually are. There's like a good sort of, I don't have a lot of education, or I'm a regular guy and I'm wearing jeans. I mean, that they're like sort of even dressed down so that they're not quite as threatening. And I just wondered if you think that the business in Hollywood is probably as brutal as any of the like Microsoft business, any of the computer businesses, Wall Street,
completely.
And do you think that people follow these laws in Hollywood as much as any other business?
Yes, I mean, a lot of businesses are kind of run by the bottom line. So there's a pretty neat division. You know, you make money and you're going to be successful. Now, obviously that exists in Hollywood to some extent. But a lot of in the studios and various production companies, there's really no way to measure who's powerful and not, who's really good at their job. So bullshitting and politicking and game playing become more and more important. It's sort of like the Politburo in the Soviet Union. There was no sort of measure for why somebody should rise up in the Politburo because they were all just political animals, and so it only rewarded the political animals. The same thing in any kind of business where it's not clear-cut what makes someone exactly successful. You're going to see all of that political bullshit stuff rising and getting more and more prevalent. So, you know, is it worse than Wall Street? No, but it's probably just as bad. And I personally, and I had 20 different jobs in Hollywood, I witnessed some pretty nasty maneuvers that actually inspired the book.
Well, I was reading the book and I was thinking about Hollywood, and I covered, as I was telling you earlier, I covered the Pelicano scandal, which was about a corrupt private eye who was wiretapping different people.
Sure.
But the real crux of the scandal was the fact it was who he was doing it for, which really never ever hit the press, no matter how hard I tried.
What was he doing?
Well, different studio heads and powerful, pretty much every billionaire in Los Angeles. I mean, everybody used his services, but they were powerful enough that he didn't end up telling on them, and so he went to prison for them. But you wrote that in the book, you said that sometimes it's better to completely destroy your enemies than to simply wound them so that they can rise up again. And this is what you wrote. You said, China's history abounds with examples of enemies who were left alive and returned to haunt the lenient. Crush the enemy is a key strategic tenet of Sun Tzu, is that how you say it?
Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu, okay. The 4th century BC author of The Art of War. The idea is simple. Your enemies wish you ill. There's nothing they want more than to eliminate you. If in your struggles with them you stop halfway or even 3/4 of the way out of mercy or hope of reconciliation, you only make them more determined, more bitter, and they will someday take revenge. And I'm wondering if some people in Hollywood, like say a Michael Ovitz, overplay this law of power and that they go too far and they don't understand, I guess, the subtleties of what you were writing about. And their enemies, even people they destroyed, I mean, they have new enemies.
See, you're using an example of what kind of, and I'm not at all criticizing you, but it sort of annoys me about the approach to this book. Everybody chooses that one law to talk about it, and it's only one law, and there are 15 other laws about how you need to seduce and win over your enemy and make them your ally.
So he employed only one of the laws and not all of the ones to be successful?
Well, the fact that people are always focusing on that one law is sort of telling in itself.
Yeah.
There's a law in there about, you know, win over the hearts and minds of the people that you're dealing with. It's much better to turn somebody into an ally than into trying to crush them totally. that was written because I see it all the time in business, and it bothered me that no one really recognizes this. So for instance, with Microsoft is dealing with Netscape, their strategy is to wipe Netscape off the planet, not leave one shred of that company left. They're going to dominate the internet. And so they totally, where is Netscape now? You look at Google, they say, don't be evil, and what's their strategy? To get rid of every conceivable competitor or buy them out. It's the dynamic in business. And so...
But I see what you're saying. It's that what you see in Hollywood for the people that lose is that they haven't employed some of the really important laws of power. Yeah. Because I think that a Michael Ovitz or even a Brad Gray at a certain point failed to win over the hearts and minds. So I think it's kind of interesting that that the people, because you see people in this town go all the way to the top and fall really hard.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wondered, based on what you're saying, it seems to me is that they're not following a lot of the really important laws that are in this book and just sort of picking out the one, just like I did, of the crushing of the enemy. Well, is that what you're saying?
Yes, and let's say...
I think that's interesting.
One of the icons in this book, and this relates to mastery as well, because these people you're talking about haven't really mastered their field. They kind of... burn themselves out. But let's say one of the icons of this book is Cosimo Medici, the first Medici.
Right.
And what the wisdom of Medici, which, he was a bit of a bastard because he destroyed the republic that Florence had. It was one of the greatest democracies, examples of democracies in human history, Florence. He basically got rid of it and turned it into an aristocracy, so he's not a saint. But Medici realized that this republic that he's trying to gain power in is very democratic, and people are very suspicious of wealthy people. So he slowly accumulated more and more wealth and more power, but he was totally unostentatious about it. And he would ride through the streets of Florence on a donkey, and he would not dress fabulously well, and the outside of his house looked like any other Florentine villa. It's when you went in the front door and you suddenly saw where he put all his money. He was really clever at winning over the people that he had and having a base of power and not alienating the people around him. Or like Louis XIV, he was a brilliant practitioner of this art. So
I love your Louis XIV stories in this book about getting rid of certain people that might outshine him. It's like
that was law number one. But the idea is that the most powerful people know how to charm the most people, know how to not create enemies, know how to bring enemies into the fold.
Before you get to that stage.
That's the best way to crush them. Abraham Lincoln, as a quote, says that when I turn my enemy into a friend, I've defeated him as an enemy. He's no longer an enemy. Okay. So these are the laws that, that's law number 2 about turning your enemy into an ally. These are laws that a lot of people are ignoring, and they just sort of look, they're men with testosterone.
No, but it's an important
thing. And I'm going to, use the one law that allows me to just,
I think people do that. I think that they've learned that, and I think that's a problem with this town, that destruction goes without putting to use people that are super talented, that would be great to be on your team. And I think certainly with the agents, they make a huge amount of mistakes going for that law, like over all the other things that you've suggested. But let's talk about mastery.
Okay.
Your book Mastery talks about fulfilling your life's task and achieving mastery, and you say that we're born with some sort of intuition or voice, as in like Einstein was, that tells us of our own uniqueness or destiny, and that there are counterforces that silence that voice. And I'm wondering, when I was reading it, how do you, and you do give some instruction, but certainly as we're talking about this issue, how do you hold on to that voice? How are you able to clear out the clutter so that you actually hear the voice that's telling you what your destiny is? And you actually see parents work against this voice, which certainly Jewish parents that are sending you off to graduate school. But how do you stay focused? Because I do think that you're right about that. That when we're growing up, there are hits, and you hear them, and then you learn. You fail to pay attention. So how do you get that back?
Well, let me just first say that the book Mastery itself.
Let me show everybody, because you have it over here. Just so this is going to be out, and this is. The book Mastery, Robert's book. So I just didn't have a copy of it, but I think because I'm reading it on my computer since I'm so forward thinking. There we go. Okay. It was very hard for me to download, but I finally figured it out. Hence my bragging. But go ahead.
Well, no, the book comes from basically 15 years of researching this subject, and people like Louis XIV or 50 Cent, the sort of combination of historical and contemporary figures, I noticed that they all shared certain qualities and they had gone through a similar kind of apprenticeship and process. So the book itself is sort of a synthesis of all my other work. It's sort of what I consider to be the ultimate form of power, which is mastering your field and being creative. If you have a mind that now is so enriched with knowledge and knows your field so well, you can make all kinds of interesting associations between different ideas and see things that other people don't see. That's like the philosopher's stone of power. You can be in any situation in life. You could be stranded on an island, you could be fired. You'll get yourself back to the top because you know how to think and you know how to be creative. The key to it all is that what you're talking about is law number one, is sort of knowing who you are. And what I say is, it seems poetic, but it's not actually poetic. All of us are, and there's nothing wrong with being poetic.
No, it is kind of poetic.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go
ahead.
All of us are born unique, and scientifically, your DNA will never be replicated, never happened before, never will happen again. There is something about you that's unique. Now, you could say the same thing about a duck or a lamb, but they don't have consciousness. They can't express their uniqueness. A human being can. This uniqueness that you had when you were born manifested itself by certain things you were drawn to. You were drawn to games, strategy, chess, that you'd be like a Napoleon, or you're drawn to music, or you were drawn to visual patterns, or you were drawn to sports and things like that. It's very primal, and it's showing something about you that's unique. And I compare it to a kind of a voice that's inside of you. It's a voice that you're 5 or 6 years old that's sort of saying, this is what you're interested in, Robert, or this is what you really like, Allison. And as we get older, that voice tends to become drowned out by your parents who are saying, go to law school, be a doctor, I'm doing the Jewish parent here, but go to law school, be a doctor.
It's an archetype.
It works, though, as my parents.
Works for me.
Okay. Or you're listening to peers who are saying, this is the cool job, you want to be a rock star and you have no interest in being in it, but you're going to do it because it's cool. Or money's the prime thing, I got to be comfortable, this is a tough world to live in. And that voice gets drowned out. And in your 20s and 30s, you can kind of fake it. If you end up in a field like you go into law, and really, there are people who were maybe born to be lawyers. I have nothing against it. Abraham Lincoln loved law, and that maybe was his life's task. But a lot of people go into law, and that isn't their dream. It's not what they were drawn to as a child, You can fake your way when you're in your 20s and 30s. Because you're young, life's exciting, you can make money, can be sort of a motivating factor. But what happens is you're less and less engaged in your work. You're not connected deeply. You're kind of bored. You're not paying deep attention. You're sort of skating by. And by your late 30s, it starts to catch up with you. And people are coming up who are younger than you, who are handsomer, who are less expensive. They replace you. You're downsized. You're out of a job. And suddenly you don't have the skills to adapt because you didn't really follow something you were meant to follow. And the people who know themselves, it's not a matter of just simply becoming a rock star and playing the guitar because that's what you felt like. You have to be practical. You have to find something that's related to your interests that you can live in and make money. But those are the ones that end up doing much better in their 30s and 40s, making more money and being a lot happier, not necessarily choosing that high-powered job when they were younger. So it's a matter of connecting with that voice that was very clear in childhood.
It seems to me that the society that would really work against that. Because it depends where the societal values. It would depend where you are and what your society values, and they would really beat down any kind of voice inside of you. If your voice is saying that you want to be a writer, which happens to, we're both very familiar with. You said it has to be practical. It's almost an impossible job to be practical in. In terms of making money, being a writer, writing books, let's say, but I'm just saying that the society values the money. The status. So how do you divorce yourself from? Or how do you keep your path when your society is telling you
Well,
the things that are important that aren't important to you?
Drumming it into your brain about this over and over again, because you've got a misperception, and you're sort of giving the misperception right there. I just finished reading the Steve Jobs biography. I was a little late, obviously. I had this book to write. And he's like the classic example of this. He never cared about money. Money was never the motivation. In fact, he in his house, he had no furniture. And he was infamous for he didn't care about the bottom line. He cared about making the best product he could, craftsmanship. Now, he wasn't the nicest person, but look at what he did. Look at what he achieved.
I think you have to put the nice or not nice person to the side when we're talking about following. I mean, you may have an asshole who's following his dream, but we're just trying to dissect how you keep that in your, how you focus on it.
Well, so the reason I bring that up is I can give you 20 more examples of that. I could bring up Larry Page and Sergey Brin and other people in business, and I'm on the board of directors of American Apparel, so I'm very close with the director there, the CEO of Charney. Right. None of these people started out thinking about money. None of them. That was never their motivation. Their motivation for Sergey, for Brin and Page was they were scientists and mathematicians, and they were interested in statistical things, and they wanted to create the best search engine, and they just hit upon this idea that was, turned into Google. The same thing with Steve Jobs. Dove was really into what we call the schmata business. You know what a schmata is.
Yes.
And he was interested in making clothes, and then he saw the potential, and he kind of got into American Apparel because of this incredible factory that he built here in downtown Los Angeles. The people that really are successful, and I'm talking, I don't want to go in, I'm not Mitt Romney here. I don't think entrepreneurs are the only people who are successful. I'm talking about teachers, I'm talking about scientists.
See, I think what you're saying is important, and I'm just saying that I think that it particularly, because when you get to be in your 40s, I mean, you recognize that often people recognize that that's not going to be enough for you to just be doing something that you're slogging through to make money.
Yes.
But I think in your 20s, that is it's difficult for people to understand that what you're saying is if you follow something and you get very good at something, and it's something you're interested in, that it may end up leading to money. But that
it will.
But that's what I think people miss it, and I think it's important that they see that in your book.
Well, so I interviewed 9 contemporary masters for this book, including stories about Da Vinci and Darwin. I did not interview Da Vinci, but I interviewed 9.
That's a relief. And I was like, okay.
So I had 9 contemporary masters. One of these masters was a man named Paul Graham. I don't know how many people out there have heard of Paul Graham, but he has a company called Y Combinator in Silicon Valley. He's the person that kind of invented internet businesses. And he's a writer, he does many things. And his business is worth, I don't know, I think it's estimated in $5 billion, something right now. He basically runs an apprenticeship system in the Silicon Valley for people who are going to start their own tech startups. Anyway, Paul Graham in his 20s, he loves computers. He goes to Harvard. He's a very smart guy. I understand that, but he hates academia. He hates politics. He hates businesses and how they're run. But he's really smart at computers. He decides that he really likes painting, and he goes and he gives up all the computer stuff, and he goes to Florence and he studies painting. He's kind of lost. He doesn't know where he fits. He doesn't fit in academia. He doesn't fit in working in a computer type job doing software or being a consultant. So he learns painting. He goes to New York, and now he's living in a loft painting, living that kind of cliche, but he's sort of happy. But he doesn't have any money, and he's in his late 20s. And suddenly he hears an ad on the radio from Netscape. No, this is before it was just starting out. And Netscape is saying, we're the future. Their businesses are going to be run on the internet. And at the time, nobody understood that. And he thought, maybe I can make that work. And he brings in his friend who's a great hacker, and they say, we can create something for the internet that no one's thinking of. And it's kind of calling up all of the skills that he developed in programming, but in painting as well, and he'll talk about that very eloquently in his book. So he built up these skills, things that genuinely interested him, and then suddenly he hears something on the radio, and all of those skills he now can bring together, and he goes ahead and he creates Via Web, which Yahoo buys for $50 million. Right. So that's the path in these days, that you're in your 20s, you need to learn skills. These skills need to be things that you're interested in. You don't, when you're in your 20s, you don't need to be making a lot of money. That's the time when you can live cheaply. You don't need a house. You can live in an apartment. That's when you need to be building skills and not caring so much about that money coming in, because that opportunity will come to you if you do this smartly.
Yeah, you talk about the serendipity. That was in that section of your book where you write about serendipity as being part of the process of getting to your mastery. And I guess my first, and you actually sort of intuited that somebody's going to say, well, that, like, if I'm supposed to wait around for that moment to happen. And then you say now that there are things that you can be doing. So let's just talk about the two methods for you to get to that point where you see an advertisement. Like you see that advertisement and all of your skills come together. So what is it, how do you get to talk about the skills that you write about so that you can get to that serendipitous moment of finding the exact path that you should be on?
Well, you need to read the book because I have 50,000 examples of it. I mean, it happened to me. I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. But I also had a deep interest in history. And of course, after college, I get into journalism, and journalism doesn't really fit me. But I learned writing skills. I learned how to write on a deadline. I learned good grammar and spelling and everything like that, how to tell a story.
How to be manipulative?
How to be manipulative, how to tell a story.
How to get people to tell you their secrets.
Yeah, well, I never was really good at that. But,
no?
Okay, I'm not the best interviewer, but you're the master at that.
I'm working on it. Okay. I'm on my way.
Okay.
I still have a few laws to incorporate, but as I see, but hopefully I'll get there.
Okay.
It's a continuous process.
Okay, that's good to hear. And then, I worked in Hollywood. That didn't fit. I don't really write screenplays very well, but I tried it. I really tried it. And then 1995, I meet this man who's a book packager, and we're in Italy at the time, and he's Dutch, and he asked me, Robert, do you have any ideas for books? That was a terrible Dutch accent. That was Russian. Anyway, and I suddenly got, this is my opportunity. I hate journalism. I hate Hollywood. A book. All right, and I just, like, everything came into gear, and I gave him a pitch, which turned into the 48 Laws of Power. I call it in my war book, death ground. You're on death ground. Your back is to the wall, and you're either going to die or make it.
I guess.
But
go ahead, finish.
So what you do is you build up skills. I had built up enough writing skills so that when the time and research skills, so that when the opportunity came, I was able to exploit it. Opportunities are happening to you every single day.
Well, that's what I was getting to.
You're hearing things on the radio. People are offering you things.
But you have to try them.
It's not that. It's that. But you have to recognize them. So if I were in my early 20s and he offers me a book, I'm too young. I don't know what it is. I do it half-assed. I kind of do it on the side. I'm not motivated. I don't really realize that this is my one chance to make it in life. You have to first recognize the opportunity, and you have had to have built up the skills in order to really exploit it. This is a future now where it's all about the skills that you have. It's not a bullshit world where your charm and your beautiful nature and your pretty face are going to get you that far. You can wing it for a while. You need to have skills, and the more you build up in the 20s, the better. The more you'll have the chance to combine them in an interesting way. So I was able to combine my knowledge of history and research and my writing into a book that, was, I don't know how good it is, but it was unique. No one has ever seen it before. Am I answering your question?
I mean, I think so, but what I was getting at is the breadth of the search and the fact that, and you sort of told it in your own story of going from, career to career. And I think a lot of people, they ask me about this too, because I was a lawyer before I was a journalist. And it was, there are skills that come with each step that you take. And you wrote about, you said you have to read the book. Yeah, I would recommend that people read the book, but there's also, which was a very good pitch, but there's also this wide search, you said, and that's sort of the way you lived your own life. Where you're open to trying different kinds of things.
Well, the thing is,
which is unusual.
We live in a time that we should get on our hands and knees and kiss the ground. That first of all, women, minorities, etc., the barriers that kept people from being a master are falling down. So politically, Not completely, but they are falling down. So almost anyone can take this path. The second thing is the amount of information at our disposal is absolutely outrageous, what we can get on the internet, for example. So you need to be an explorer. You need to be, so for you, for instance, going to law school, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not that you didn't follow your life's task. You developed a very important skill, and then at some point you realized, law isn't for me. I wasn't destined for this, but you had something really important that now you can apply to journalism when you decided you were going to get into journalism and become a writer, and you could apply it to, I mean, all sorts of things.
But I think that people are very staid, and I found in my own experience that even despite the multitude of opportunities that are available for those of us who I guess can sort of get by on a little bit of money initially, despite all those opportunities, I think there were rules that, and they come from parents and they come from your society or wherever you grew up, that you're not supposed to change, that what you do initially is what it's going to be for your whole life. And I think you're writing absolutely if the opposite of that in a lot of respects. So I think that's an interesting lesson.
In fact, the title of this could be "Don't Listen to Your Parents." Okay, all right, shut them up. Don't listen to them. Basically, it's a new world that we live in, and we need to catch up to it. So, my father, he worked at one job his whole life. Okay, whoever does that anymore?
Well, that's what I think people need to.
So you've got to change your attitude about what work is now, and not have your parents' attitude about work. And I think the people who are experiment in their 20s, who learn different skills, who aren't so hung up on money, they're going to be the ones in their 30s and 40s who are going to be running this world, who are going to be making money, who are going to be found.
And I think that's a great point.
And I've seen it in not only in history, but I have 80,000 examples of this, as I told you, of people like that. They're the ones that in their 30s and 40s are going to be running this world. They have built up so many different skills. And the other thing is, we all know this, when you're motivated, you can move mountains, right? So if you're learning a foreign language and you're kind of have to because it's a requirement in college, you're not really paying attention. If you have a French girlfriend and you're living in France and you like French literature, suddenly you're paying attention, and in 2 weeks you can learn more than what you learned in 2 years of French at the university because you're motivated. So when you're curious and excited about a field, you're going to learn it really well, and when you learn it really well, you enter this, what I call a cycle of accelerated returns. They call it in chemistry autocatalysis. One bit of success leads to another, leads to another. It sets in this sort of catalytic process where the mind suddenly jumps into gear and you become creative because you're motivated, and you can, if you learn something in 2 years intensely, it's 10 times the value than if you learned it in 10 years. So motivation is the key to mastery, and you're not going to be motivated if you are destined to be a writer and you're studying law. Well, those two aren't so widely separated, but, so you can ignore what I'm saying here, but, good luck.
Yeah, you're like, you can ignore it at your own peril. Let me ask you a little bit about the I'm going to segue because we're not having our mayhem round because producer Nick could not be here, and we generally have a producer Nick who's part of the show who kind of goes on some current events topics and sort of asks questions.
He's the empty chair, the Clint
Eastwood. He is the empty chair. No, there's no Clint Eastwood going on here. I could never pull that off. He was the master of the empty chair.
Okay.
But what I wanted to ask you about was politics and who
Sure.
you think has mastered in terms of the political race, putting aside liberal or conservative, but looking at Romney and Obama. If you think either one of them is a master at what they're doing.
Well, I make the point in the book that you can pretty much judge and measure a person by their apprenticeships. It's not like someone is born a leader or born a great politician. They go through an apprenticeship. Their hours of work and what they did in the past will reveal to you what kind of president or leader they will be. Barack Obama had a short apprenticeship, a truncated one. He served in the Senate, was, I don't know, what, 5 years, 6 years, something like that?
I think only like one term and a little bit more.
Okay. Now, I love him dearly, but that was a short apprenticeship for leading a country, and he had some rocky moments as a president. But one can say that he's the type of person, for a politician, what you really want is adaptability. You want a person who can adapt and isn't closed-minded and can learn. I think he rates fairly high on that scale, and I believe that if there was a second term, he would show that he's learned a lot of these lessons, and he would be quite an effective president. Mitt Romney comes from a business background. He's a salesman. Let's just say it what he is. If he's a master at sales. And I don't really rate being a master at salesmanship very high. You can learn how to be a great salesman in 3 or 4 years. You know, it's not like that's some. You
don't rate it high in terms of value, or in terms of a specialty that most people could learn it. I mean, how's that rating system? What's the basis of that?
If you're going to be a salesman and you're selling a product, it's a trade and it's a craft, and yes, and there are people who are really good at it, and there's, I suppose, some value to it, but it's not a kind of value that, let's say you end up in Hollywood and you're the head of a studio and you're basically a salesman. That skill set isn't necessarily going to make you a very effective leader. I don't think it'll make a very effective president.
So it's not a great apprenticeship for being...
I don't think so.
That's it, okay.
Is he someone that could learn on the job? Mitt Romney, maybe.
I know, we're both I'm trying to be objective here because I'm interested in the assessment and not in the politics of it. Although I feel the same way you do about him.
You know, he's sort of a people pleaser, which is a typical salesman type approach.
But he's a people pleaser who seems to forget as he's trying to be a master, it seems like he needs a lot more time to gel because he's so obvious in his trying to ingratiate himself.
Yeah, but does he have the material to become a master? To be a master, you have to kind of focus and be open and fluid and adaptable. It's not just anybody just by being president is therefore a master. We've had presidents before W. I would hardly call a master.
Who's a master of the common man thing that you were talking about with the Medicis of acting, a rich person acting as if he's a man of the people?
But he didn't really need to act, you know. It was kind of like that.
But he was from a background of privilege, and he pretended to be your beer drinking, good buddy next door neighbor guy.
Well, he could pull it off though because it was sort of real. But you know, Mitt, if I can use his first name.
You may. Yeah.
You know,
it's not usually the name I use, but go ahead.
I don't think he has the material necessarily because he's always looking to polls, how to please people, how to what's the most effective way to win an election or win a campaign. That's not necessarily going to translate into being an effective leader of a very powerful country. And I noticed, I've been a consultant for many years. People in business and other places come to me. A classic example will be a salesman in a brokerage firm who is the best salesman there and suddenly gets promoted to VP position, is now an executive, a manager instead of a salesman, and they're totally out of their league and they have all sorts of problems and they come to me to help them figure out the problem. That's what Mitt reminds me of, the salesman who's now going to be promoted to the executive position. You know, God help us all. Let's hope there's something there that I don't know if he wins that can translate it. But winning a campaign and president, you can be a master at that, but that's not the same thing as being a master at leadership. It's a very, very difficult skill, particularly in this world. And someone like Bill Clinton, I would call a master at it if I had to.
I think he's kind of in a class by himself in terms of being a politician. He's risen. He has his ups and downs too, Clinton, but he seems to be able to learn how to improve every time. He seems to just keep going on a forward trajectory. But I'm curious, Do you think that we misidentify people in this country as masters who aren't masters and just sort of give them that name because they have prestige?
Can you give me an example?
Well, I think certainly in entertainment. I mean, because they have prestige and they have good luck, good fortune, and they're doing well, and we have all these actors that suddenly are at the top. They don't stay very long in modern day Hollywood, but you know,
well, anybody's
like those superstars that are just there for that moment and then they kind of fall. But we say there is a master. He's a master, like like he's a master of acting or directing.
No. I mean, 50 talked about this a lot, and he understood it very well because he saw that in the hip hop world, there are all these people that come in, they get one album, maybe two, and then they're gone forever, right? And they get kind of chewed up by the business and spat out. And so they're not they've not built up skill sets. They don't treat it as a craft. They get emotional. They're after the bling, they're after the money, they're after the women. They don't think of it that it's a business and it's a craft. So he thought of it very differently. He studied under Jam Master Jay. I don't want to compare 50 to Da Vinci here, but Jam Master Jay was a pretty great rapper. He treated it as a craft. Now, acting is a craft, and actors who go 10, 20 years definitely are masters. And you see in old Hollywood a whole slew of who I would call masters, and they exist now. Certainly there are people like that now. But someone who just gets by because they're pretty or they look good or they have one movie, they're not masters. In fact, they're going to have a much harder life than a lot of us because this early fame is often the worst thing you can have in your life. You don't know how to handle it. You get too caught up in the emotions, and people like that often have a very hard fall because they've not built up skills. They didn't treat it like a craft. I
just sort of think that the media makes masters out of people who don't have the goods, and it's based on sort of that just 1 second kind of appeal that they've had it's like sort of a one-hit wonder, and they build them way up, and it's sort of part of the business of writing about people that the next day you take them down, and people will want to read about that after you built them up.
If I can put my finger out a little bit on the zeitgeist and notice something changing, I'm hoping that that's changing. I'm thinking we're living in a world now that is so competitive, and we have so many problems. I mean, looking, let's say, at global warming or what's happening with the environment and biodiversity, but also just on all sorts of levels, that this is a future that's going to reward people that know how to solve problems. I think we're entering a practical period in history where the hype, the reality shows, the entertainers, they're not going to be, maybe I'm wishful thinking, but that's my feeling. They're not going to be so venerated. And the people that are going to be venerated are those who know technology. The great business leaders like of Google or Steve Jobs did not start off in business. They started off in tech and science. Are people who solve problems, who are practical, who have skill, and they can be entertainers or writers. Right. But I think we're entering a period that's going to be more like the Renaissance, etc., where we actually value craftsmanship and people who get things done, who know how to build something, as opposed to all the bullshit artists that we're surrounded by who think that their charm and their good looks and their being on a television show makes them something great. I mean, that's my hope.
Well, I'm going to end it there because that's my hope as well. I agree with you. I hope so. I mean, I think that we have gone through a period where people are venerated where there's no there. That's sort of what I was getting at.
I agree with you.
And I wondered, especially, I mean, when you read your book, I mean, it becoming, a master, it takes so much effort and learning and skill building, as you've been saying. The word's misused, I guess, is what I was getting at.
But if there's a final point, if we have one more minute here.
You have another minute.
Okay. It's not all drudgery. I mean, it is a lot of hours, but actually, Henry Ford, who's one of the people I talk in there, he says, I never felt like it was hard work because I loved it so much. It just felt like fun. When you're like enjoying what you do, it's not really hard work. It's kind of this love that you have of what you're doing. I feel that with writing. I feel like I'm blessed to be able to write. I wake up every morning, I'm happy.
It's unusual for a writer.
Well, I'm neurotic.
Okay, you're scaring me.
And my girlfriend would say that, she would probably disagree with what I just said.
But you wake up happy to write?
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, there's a sense of fulfillment. Let me put it that way.
It's when you're done.
No,
No?
you have a high when you're writing. I have a high. And I have a lot of neurotic moments, but I have a lot of highs. But anyway, the sense of fulfillment that you have is so much greater than you would have just getting drunk or stoned or whatever, that it leads to a kind of a fulfillment and pleasure that's more solid than anything else. So it's not all just like pain and work and effort.
Well, I think we went through that in a sense at the beginning, just to come full
Yeah.
circle, that the idea was to pick something you actually like, and or get there through a series of things you might not like as much, but ultimately end up at doing something
Right.
that you enjoy.
Right.
But it is, when I say there's no there, I mean you have to know how to do something for you to be a master, and sometimes it's just a very superficial title that's applied to people that you kind of like because they're charming, and you say that they're, even with writing, they're a great writer, and I
Right.
mean half the time it's like it's a piece of crap.
I agree with you.
You know,
I agree with you. Yeah.
so, all right, well, I wanted to thank you. I want to remind the viewers that The
Oh.
Mastery will be released on November 13th, 2012. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you visit my website, it's powerseductionandwar.com, and is spelled out, powerseductionandwar.com. We're having a special offer. If you pre-order the book, we've come up with all this material that's not in the book that you get as a, I know I sound like KCET or something here. you don't get like a tote
If you're
bag.
a member, I'm on your blog. I mean, then there's your
Okay.
blog and everything. Yeah.
There's no tote bag.
Oh, wow.
But you
I
get,
don't know. I shouldn't have thought about that. Yeah.
But you get an
Eye cream? No.
no eye cream. You get a special essay that I wrote, and added material that's not in the book, and
Okay.
a few other little goodies.
And I also
So-
recommend that they also, if you haven't read the 48 Laws of Power, you should. It's really interesting, and you have, I mean, when I first read it, and I was actually talking with Sheila, who was part of our group here and going to be working on our newsletter, Sheila Lane, about how you get a first impression of it, and then you have to read it some more, and you get a second impression. I mean, it's worth like rereading because
good,
it all
yeah.
ties together, and I understand, you know, because when I pulled out the one law, but I do think that a lot of people just pull out different laws that they follow,
Sure.
and it can lead to ruin. But anyway, I think that people should read that as well. I want to tell the audience, too, to be sure to check on the Facebook page, Media Mayhem with Allison Hope Weiner. Come to our website at the liptv.com and watch all the shows, are there archived for you, and follow me on Twitter at @HopeWeiner. And I will see you guys next week, where hopefully our guests will be as interesting as Robert was today. And yeah, thanks. You gave me a lot of stuff to think about.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you for
it.
having me.
Bye, everybody.